I knew this shoe was coming, so I was holding off on my 2024 rankings of the year, which will be coming soon, but this may be my #1 daily trainer of 2024. Meet the ASICS Novablast 5. What's up everybody, I'm Eric McIntyre, aka Rad Dad Bod, and you're watching Rad Dad Bod TV, where we review running shoes. Now today we're going to talk about the Novablast 5, but before we get into some details, got a couple of things to point out. If this is your first time watching one of my reviews, you'll probably notice some timestamps below. Feel free to jump around throughout the review, but if you do so, I would sure appreciate if you come back and watch the full video when you get a second. And if you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, tell me what you're looking for in your shoe reviews, and turn on those notifications so you get notified every time I drop a new video, which typically I'll drop 3 times a week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and occasionally I'll do a little bit more as well. Now before we dive into the specifics of this shoe, just some quick disclaimers and disclosures. I received this shoe actually through my affiliation with Utah Run, my local running store, but it was provided for me at no cost from the local ASICS rep. That being said, no one gets to watch these videos beforehand. No one asks me to make any specific content, give me scripts, things to say, anything like that. All thoughts are entirely my own. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the intended use of this shoe. Novablast 5 is a standard daily trainer, but falls into kind of this newer category that is maybe not an official category of like a responsive daily trainer. That's just a fancy way of saying that this shoe can do a little bit of everything, which is true for the standard daily trainer category, but the better and better that shoes are getting, the more and more responsive this category is becoming. Now, as such, I will be evaluating this as a standard daily trainer, not an up-tempo trainer, not a lightweight daily trainer, just a standard daily trainer. Now, starting off with the price, this shoe comes in at $140, which is an awesome price point for a shoe like this, and frankly is very, very reasonable, if not even cheap for a shoe of this caliber. Standard daily trainers can come in anywhere from like $140 to $160, so I really like the lower price point overall. This ends up being comparable to some other models like the Hoka Clifton and the Nike Pegasus. Now from a specs perspective, this shoe comes in at 9.0 ounces and 255 grams, so it's not the lightest shoe in the world, but is right around that range that you want for a standard daily trainer. Not too light, not too heavy. Believe it or not, the stack height in this shoe is pretty wild. So you got 41.5 in the heel and 33.5 in the forefoot for an 8mm heel to toe drop. And for those who are wondering where I get those specs, I either get them directly from the brand reps themselves, or I will get them from a website like Running Warehouse, who measures independently. Now I did a full breakdown video a couple of weeks ago of the 4 versus the 5, but for those who didn't watch that, just if you're curious, it's only about a 0.5 millimeter higher in both the heel and the forefoot. So overall, it's going to be a similar stack feel to the Novablast 4. Moving to the fit, I found that this shoe fits true to size lengthwise, and it fits somewhat roomy otherwise. I think if you're a wide-footed runner, then you should be comfortable in the shoe for the most part. I don't think that it's like overwhelmingly wide by any means though. So I just call it more accommodating. So standard to wide overall. I feel like the toe box breathes pretty well. The midfoot is where it's probably a little bit more narrow, but again, still on the wider end overall. And again, when compared to previous models, I found that this was a more standard fit versus the 4. I know some people had to size down in order to accommodate the wide overall fit. So this feels somewhat normal. Now moving to the upper, this is an engineered jacquard mesh, which is the same material as the Novablast 4 LE. So if you got the limited edition version, that one was a jacquard, but if not, this is an updated upper overall and is a little bit more breathable than previous models. Now, all in all, I do find that the upper is still a little bit warm, despite being a little bit more breathable kind of in the toe box and that midfoot area. There's still a good amount of cushion here in the heel, and that is where I found that a lot of that warmth is coming from, but you kind of have that trade-off of comfort and plush, and this shoe is very, very comfortable on foot overall. So this is where I was almost tempted to look at this as more of a lightweight trainer, but I do feel like it fits more standard into that standard daily trainer category due to some of the cushioning and the overall setup of the shoe. That and the weight. You do have a somewhat standard tongue, and it is fully gusseted, which is really, really nice. So despite being a little bit more accommodating of a fit, I found that the lockdown was really nice and appropriate. I wasn't sliding around in the shoe at all, and I didn't feel like I was shifting whatsoever, even on slightly faster paces. The tongue did sometimes slide around though, despite being fully gusseted, because it's kind of detached a little bit here in the upper. But overall, the upper was very comfortable and fit just fine, and I didn't find myself really thinking about it too much while I was running. Now, the biggest update for this shoe is actually the midsole when compared to the 4. So you have FF Blast Max in the midsole, which is a slightly softer, more responsive foam. Now, I made the mistake of saying that this shoe felt firmer than the 4 because I hadn't just stood in the shoes next to each other. Instead, I was comparing kind of the sensation when running. So if you are looking for a shoe that is soft on foot, but is going to feel responsive, and it isn't going to compress a ton, it's just going to rebound a little bit more when you put some force into the shoe, then that's really what you're feeling here. So the foam itself is softer, but I find it does not compress as much as the slightly firmer Novablast 4 foam, if that makes sense. I've heard some people call it mushy. I would not say that it is mushy at all, honestly, but it is definitely bouncy. It is definitely responsive. As such, you don't really notice any weight in the shoe, at least for me, and I have a slightly heavier stride than a lot of people. And so I found that this was very, very comfortable, and I feel like the foam personally is an upgrade over the 4, and I quite enjoyed the 4, honestly. This is just going to be a little bit more lively of a shoe overall. Now, what's nice with this FF Blast Max foam is I found that it was fairly pace versatile. So really with a standard daily trainer, you do want some versatility. You want to be able to go easy with the shoe. You want to be able to go long with the shoe. You want to be able to just handle standard daily miles without it being overly squishy to where it's going to fatigue the feet. And that was the case for this foam. So this is a really, really balanced foam in my opinion. So I really found that the foam did kind of check all of the boxes. I found that the shoe felt really, really nice, and you could definitely take this up to probably tempo paces, but if you're going to go do an interval session, it's probably not the shoe for you unless you're kind of a one do-it-all shoe type of person. Now, from a stability standpoint, I find that the shoe is wide enough that I didn't notice any interior rolling despite having a softer foam. Now, if you are someone though who overpronates, this is not a stability shoe. I just don't anticipate the shoe giving people without stability needs any stability issues, if that makes sense. So if you've been okay in previous models of the Novablast, or even if you have used maybe something like the Gel Nimbus, which is another ASICS model that isn't a stability shoe, then I do anticipate that you're going to be okay from a stability standpoint in the shoe as well. The majority of runs that I did in these shoes were easy runs or kind of standard daily runs, but I did put it through a couple of progression runs as well. Just something to think about, because I think a lot of people maybe are looking at the Superblast. If you've tried the Superblast and you're hoping that the Novablast is going to feel very similar, the Superblast is a firmer foam than the Novablast. And I do feel like that firmness actually aids in some of the responsiveness of the Superblast 2. So overall, I really like the update to the foam, but if it did get any softer, then you're probably starting to lean more towards like recovery day shoes, and that's not what this shoe is by any means. Now, the outsole is going to be a high abrasion rubber. It's got that familiar Novablast outsole pattern. One thing to call out, you do still have kind of this oval here in the forefoot, and in the Novablast 2 that was an issue for me. It caused some discomfort underfoot, both in the Novablast 4 and the Novablast 5. That is not something that has caused any issues for me whatsoever. From a wear and tear standpoint, it looks like the outsole is holding up decently through 40+ miles, but there are some things that I'm noticing, like here kind of at some of the endpoints of that outsole or the rubber coverage, it is starting to wear a little bit on the foam. And so I'm not sure how much of that outsole has kind of worn down, but I wouldn't want ASICS to put more rubber underfoot because that would just increase the weight, obviously. And so just as I'm looking at the shoes, it does look like the outsole is holding up for the most part, but again, slight wear and tear. So if you are a forefoot striker, I would expect it to maybe wear down a little bit more, as that's where I'm starting to see the majority of the wear on the shoe. ASICS uses a high abrasion rubber though, and I found that it does really, really well, even on wet roads. I had no kind of grip concerns whatsoever. And I've even worn the Novablast 5 and Novablast 4 on kind of some just very, very tame and moderate trails and never felt like the traction was going to be an issue. So something to think about. It's a good shoe with it being a little bit warm and then having nice traction. Could be a good winter option if you're someone who is concerned maybe about slipping around on winter roads some. Now, as far as who's this shoe for, really, if someone's looking for like one shoe to do everything, if you're a one shoe rotation type of person, you don't have stability needs, you like a slightly wider foot shape or a slightly wider foot, or a slightly wider fitting shoe, then the Novablast 5 is going to kind of check all of those boxes for you. But I also think it's just going to be a really good daily trainer to have in a rotation. The overall setup of the shoe is very similar, if not identical in a lot of ways, to the Superblast 2. So if you really like the Superblast 2 for kind of marathon training miles and you want something that feels very, very similar for the kind of daily miles, this is going to be your option. And also if you're someone who doesn't necessarily like the feeling of kind of an overly heavy or just like overly plush shoe on your easy days, but you would rather feel a little bit nimble, then the Novablast 5 is going to be kind of a good daily and easy day option. And that's how I used it primarily. I prefer to have something a little bit lighter or a little bit more responsive on foot. I like kind of the running economy gains as opposed to kind of the cushy feeling underfoot, if that makes sense. I do feel like this shoe strikes a really good balance between the two though, so really comes down to you and your preferences, but overall I think everyone could find a place, especially at $140 for the Novablast 5 in their rotation, no matter how many shoes they're currently rotating. Final thoughts on the shoe. Like I said, I do think this is going to be my #1 shoe of the year as far as daily trainers go. Now, I do need to clarify where a couple of other shoes maybe fit with my brand reps just before I put out my final rankings. I would expect those to kind of come out early January, just because I want to make sure that I am hitting some of those releases that happen in December, because they are technically 2024 shoes. But the ASICS Novablast 5, to probably no one's surprise, is going to do really, really well on a lot of people's rankings. It just strikes a really good balance of comfort, where you can run easy in it, you can go a little faster in it. If you really wanted to do kind of some tempo, some threshold in the shoe, it's going to get the job done, and there's enough cushion underfoot to go long if you wanted to as well. And at $140, that kind of versatility is hard to beat. So that's my review of the ASICS Novablast 5. If you're still here, I sure appreciate you. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, let me know what I could be doing better, or if there's something that you're curious about in the shoe, another comparison that you'd like to see. And as always, I'll leave you with a question, which is, what ended up being your favorite daily trainer of 2024? Let me know down below. Thanks, everybody.